Chris Nofoinga, he is gone. And Birnbaum is hurt. Touchdown, Idaho. Birnbaum's down at the 33.
Touchdown, Idaho.
His back or his neck, but you can see pressure right up the middle. Tosi will come. Nofoinga comes up the middle, and there's just a big pressure that's put on by Tosi, and then it's off to the races for Nofo. Huge turn of events. Cougars were looking like they were going to put it in the end zone or get 3 out of it.
Touchdown like they did, Baylor did to UNLV. What an incredible finish to that football game a week ago. That'll be the final snap.
Welcome back, guys. This is take 2 of this week. A few lucky individuals tuned in to the first attempt at recording this for a marathon 2-minute mute session, courtesy of Brian Marceau here, which, by the way, I'm your host, Brian Marceau. Back from my bye week, I took week 5 of Big Sky play of the college football season. Was not week 5 of the conference season, but week 5 of the FCS season. I took off. I'm back for week 6. You guys know the drill. The power rankings are delivered 12 through 1. The rankings themselves are not my rankings. I can tell you my votes, but it's a compilation of votes from Big Sky Podcast Network contributors, guys like Mike Nugent and Brent Wahlberg from Grizz Fan Pod, guys like Kyler Neal from FCS Fans Nation and Eagle Power Hour, guys like, good God, sorry, I'm dying in the comments section already looking at Captain 58 saying the silent professor in take 1, man. The joke on Tubbs of the Club, if you're not a Tubbs listener, is that I'm Grandpa Brian because I'm the least tech savvy dude. And boy, did that 2-minute mute session do nothing to kill that nomiker. So anyway, back to the votes, guys. It's all the Big Sky Podcast Network shows and contributors. Colby Peterson, Dustin Chapman from Weber State Weekly, both Ryans from R&R Catcast, myself, Martin Heemstra, and Dallas Hammer when he remembers to send his in from Tubbs of the Club, plus Big Sky beat reporters, guys like Greg Woods, who covers Idaho State, guys like Taryn Kovac, who used to cover Idaho but is still pretty tapped in, guys like Coulter Nuanez from Skyline Sports. The votes are averaged, and then I run through the teams 12 through 1. Now, little change this week. We're deep enough into the season that it's pretty clear some teams, I would just be saying the same thing every single week, particularly a couple of the lower tier teams in the conference. So I'm going to begin sticking forks in teams and just slamming through a few so that I can spend more time on the teams that are interesting. And the first team, shockingly, we start from the bottom always. Number 12. First team we're going to be sticking a fork in is Idaho State. And it brings me no joy because if you listen to press conferences, any social media postings from Idaho State, head coach Charlie Regal for Idaho State sounds like the kind of person that you would want as a head coach, a guy who's already invested in a place that has absolutely churned through coaches, a guy who's invested in developing the program. Look, Idaho State is just not there yet, and they're not going to be there this year. This week, Idaho State, look, they travel to Bozeman, lose 37-6 to Montana State. The game's not close at all. Montana State leads 34-6 at halftime and essentially puts in cruise control. 3 points are scored in the second half total, of course, from Montana State. From the Idaho State angle, look, they're on their third string quarterback. Sagan Gronauer he's not the guy, but hey, Charlie Regal knew he wasn't the guy. And that's why he's number 3 quarterback. He goes 6-23 against Montana State, 173 yards, 1 touchdown, throws 3 picks. Leading rusher again, Raiden Hunter, who is always their leading rusher, but rushes 8 times for 31 yards, so sub 4 yards per carry. Maybe the only bright spot offensively is Xavier Guillory, wide receiver, 8 catches for 80 yards, relatively impressive feat for a team that threw for 173 yards total. But look, the reason I'm sticking a fork in Idaho State, the Bengals are 0-6. Their one competitive game came in week 5 against Montana, but there's a huge asterisk. Yeah, Idaho State lost 28-20, so very good on paper performance. It was not a competitive game. Montana led 28-6 and put it in cruise control. Idaho State scores a garbage touchdown at the very end to keep it close. So minus that one, still it's a loss. The team's 0-6. Minus that asterisk of on paper, the score looks okay, but it wasn't. Idaho State has only gotten their ass kicked every single game. And truly, even though it was an 8-point game, they got their ass kicked against Montana. So look, this is just who this team is. There's one winnable game on Idaho State's schedule. It's this week hosting Cal Poly. If Idaho State doesn't beat Cal Poly, I really don't believe that there's a single win on the Bengals schedule. Maybe if Northern Arizona turns in a shitty game on October 22nd, that's in Pocatello as well. Those are maybe out of one of those games, Idaho State has a prayer to steal that. Fingers crossed that the Bengals actually do snag a win, because as much fun as it is to make fun of Big Sky teams, honestly, the conference is better when more teams are at least solid or at least kind of okay. And Idaho State right now is it's neither of those. So we're going to stick a fork in the Bengals. There's essentially nothing the team does well other than lose football games. So look, I could give you a statistical breakdown of how many yards the team purges. I could give you a statistical breakdown of how many turnovers the team accrues. It doesn't matter right now. Idaho State's in a huge rebuild, 51 new guys on the team. This is just where they're at. By the way, this episode is brought to you by Hughes River Expedition. Doing a take two is definitely not the easiest way to start a show. But we're officially sticking a fork in Idaho State until further notice. Moving on to number 11. Cal Poly is a team I am not going to stick a fork in yet. Cal Poly, relatively interesting week in my mind. The Mustangs travel to Flagstaff. This was a game, honestly, second consecutive week that I've recorded. Cal Poly's got to be telling themselves this is a game the Mustangs should have held on to. Spoiler alert, Cal Poly loses to Northern Arizona 31-29. Real tight game most of the way through. Cal Poly in the final quarter scores 9 points. One of those touchdown with a failed conversion, which, hey, that's the thing I'm going to get to here. Cal Poly loses by 2 and twice failed 2-point conversions. The first one coming in the first quarter, first score of the game, would have been up 7-0. Well, would have been up 8-0 with the 2-point conversion attempt failed. Had Cal Poly not missed those two extra points via 2-point conversions, this game's an OT. So look, this might be a game Bo Baldwin tells himself he was a little bit too cute, because those gambles. Look, that's the difference in the game, is those two missed conversions. Had Cal Poly made the first as an extra point kick, probably kicking an extra point going to overtime. And look, Northern Arizona kind of sucks too. So I don't know. Spencer Brash started at quarterback again. Jaden Jones has an unspecified lower leg injury. No timetable for his return that I'm aware of. If we have a Cal Poly aficionado who can clue us in on that, please go ahead. But there's not a Cal Poly podcast, to my knowledge, to clue us in. But Spencer Brash has looked pretty good in a consecutive weeks for Cal Poly as a backup. He was a starter for Cal Poly last season, transferred from Cal, goes 29-51 for 374 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. Leading the way on the ground for Cal Poly is Adam Garwood, 17 carries for 86 yards and a touchdown. Top receiver for Cal Poly is, you've heard this name on this show, Chris Coleman. He's their best receiver, 5 receptions, 118 yards and a touchdown. But also Josh Cuevas, another name if you're going to watch Cal Poly. Because look, Cal Poly certainly throws the ball around. Look at their pass to rush ratio. Cal Poly passes 51 times to 28 rushes, and 4 of those rushes are Spencer Brash rushes, meaning at least 1 sack. So not 28 is not the actual rush number. Cal Poly is starting to look like a Bo Baldwin team, at least in moments. That's why I'm not sticking a fork in these guys, because we're certainly seeing developmental growth from last season to this season, with Cal Poly having at least a handful of close games. The Mustangs sit right now at 1-4, but different than Idaho State. Cal Poly, actually, I lied. Cal Poly has had a close game against Northern Arizona. So, got a little bit ahead of myself. Every loss other than their narrow win versus San Diego was a 1-point win. So maybe I got ahead of myself, but I'm not sticking a fork yet in Cal Poly, because at the very least in moments, this looks like a football team where you can see the vision Bo Baldwin has for what Cal Poly is going to be, which is essentially Eastern Washington in the early to mid 2000s. Pass the ball around, accrue a ton of yards, probably aren't going to stop anyone, because that's even what Bo Baldwin's good Eastern teams did. Cal Poly has Idaho State on slate this coming week. in Pocatello. You got to say from a Cal Poly perspective, maybe I should stick a fork in Cal Poly. I just think the team's a little more interesting than Idaho State schedule-wise. If Cal Poly doesn't beat Idaho State, their next winnable game is probably closing the season on November 19th, hosting Portland State. In between Idaho State, Portland State, Cal Poly gets Eastern, Davis, Montana State. So maybe this is maybe a personal thing of just liking Cal Poly and thinking they're a little bit fun, so the fork's not stuck in them quite yet. But Cal Poly comes in at number 11. Other big takeaway for Cal Poly, I said that the team doesn't play any defense. Well, hey, they surrendered 465 yards to NAU. The Mustangs did gain 465 yards, but you can tell what kind of game that is. That both teams are threatening for right around 500 total yards. Also, turnovers 2-2. So maybe fingers crossed that's going to matter for Cal Poly. I don't think it is. Look, I've seen these guys play. They certainly can't stop anyone at all through the air. 358 passing yards from RJ Martinez would show that again. Rushing it's kind of hit or miss. They're not a good rush defense, but relatively speaking, Cal Poly defends the run better than they defend the pass. But Cal Poly in at number 11. We're going to move on. I've got another team I'm sticking a fork in, guys. So that's two teams. Northern Colorado, they come in at number 10. Fork is officially stuck in Northern Colorado. Not 100% fair to Northern Colorado because this is not the least talented football team in the Big Sky in any way. But look, Northern Colorado, they're in particular on offensively, Northern Colorado's strategy is just abominable. And the only way it's going to work at all is either play a shitty team or the Northern Colorado, a shitty team like Lamar or a shitty team like Houston Christian, who Northern Colorado lost to, or Northern Colorado gets a team that executes poorly like Idaho did against Northern Colorado in week 5 when Northern Colorado still lost by 20. Well, week 6, Northern Colorado runs into juggernaut Sacramento State. Game's 55-7. Sacramento State, obviously the winner. Northern Colorado scores a touchdown in the third quarter off a 19-yard drive off a fumble recovery. That was it offensively for what Northern Colorado could do. This game was 24-0 at half, Sacramento State. Then Sacramento State puts up 21 in the third quarter to bring their margin up to 45-7 at the end of the third. So look, this was a bloodbath the entire way. The bit I watched, Northern Colorado, the 1-yard pass, just assault of 1-yard passes is why there's a fork stuck in this team now. And in future episodes, I'm going to talk about Northern Colorado much less. Dylan McCaffrey, vintage performance, 16 of 35 for 103 yards. Yeah, that's 35 pass attempts for 103 yards, 1 pick. And again, it's because Northern Colorado calls only like 2-yard passes. Idaho the yardage McCaffrey accrued against Idaho was very good for Dylan McCaffrey, and something he was only successful against State of Idaho teams because Idaho State is terrible. And then Idaho had a terrible defensive effort in the first half, mostly based off of blown coverage from linebackers and corners freelancing in a way that left the middle of the field wide open. So the 1-yard dump off passes worked for Northern Colorado was when Idaho made it work. Yeah, well, Sacramento State didn't allow for that, and the Hornets had no trouble with it. And as I've said 1,000 times, Northern Colorado cannot run the ball. 24 rushes for 72 yards. Elijah Dodson's a very good running back who is just going to have rough stat lines at Northern Colorado. Rushes 16 times for 50 yards against Sacramento State. Did accrue the lone touchdown for the Bears. Leading the way, the receiving room, we had Ty Arrington, 4 catches for 37 yards. Elijah Dotson, the number 2 receiver, 4 receptions for 23 yards. But look, the Hornets accrued. Sacramento State has 622 total yards, meaning that's the amount of yards Northern Colorado gave up to Sacramento State. 622, guys. That's video game stats. While Northern Colorado put up 175 yards total offensively. It gives me no pleasure to make fun of Northern Colorado. I get a ton of pleasure out of making fun of Ed and Max McCaffrey because the McCaffrey family, the coaching staff is completely in over their head. Almost feel sorry for Dylan because I think Dylan McCaffrey, if he had a competent offensive coordinator, there's a world where he's a solid Big Sky quarterback. He's not the best. He would never be the best quarterback in the league, but McCaffrey has a better arm than the plays Max McCaffrey calls or the plays that Ed McCaffrey calls, whoever does the actual play calling there. It's clear between those two. Both those McCaffreys are fine with the just wretched offense that we see out in Northern Colorado. Well, it's back. It took a break against the state of Idaho teams, but the Northern Colorado you know and love is officially back, which is why I have a fork stuck in these guys. So Northern Colorado, number 10. Another reason why I was a fork stuck in Northern Colorado is combing through their schedule. Northern Colorado has at max 2 winnable games left on schedule. They're not going to win this coming week against Montana State. They're not going to win the week after against UC Davis. Maybe at Portland State is winnable, maybe. And maybe at home against Northern Arizona is winnable. So ceiling of 4 wins on the season. That's if some things go right for Northern Colorado. So look, again, fork officially stuck in Northern Colorado. We're moving on to talk about somehow a team who had that's later. Top 5 Portland State. They had the least interesting week of the season. Number 9, Northern Arizona. Talked about their game a little bit by talking about the Cal Poly game, but from the NAU perspective, Northern Arizona needed to pick up this win. This was much closer than Northern Arizona fans would have really wanted this game to be. We're really at the point where if this was the misery indexed episode, which that's going to be next week as midterm grades for the conference season, and your misery/hope index is something I'm going to talk about for each team. Northern Arizona they're a team that if I'm that fan base, I'm not particularly optimistic. The Lumberjacks did pick up their second win of the season. They won in week 2 at Sam Houston. Then handful of losses, including a pretty damn ugly loss at home against Idaho. And Northern Arizona made the Portland State game last week look respectable, 35-7 final score, but the Lumberjacks were down 35-7 or 35-8 for a good chunk of that game. So not impressive run for Northern Arizona, but hey, they pick up a win against Cal Poly. Absolutely something that Northern Arizona needed. RJ Martinez has a good game, RJ Martinez needed a good game because he's had some rough ones after a real good freshman season. He is certainly not understood as a top Big Sky quarterback the way he was understood heading into the season. But against Cal Poly's awful defense, RJ Martinez goes 31 of 45 for 358 yards and 3 touchdowns. That is obviously a good line. RJ Martinez also rushed for a touchdown, so the dude accrues 4 total touchdowns. You got to think that's a guy who's at least in the running for Big Sky Offensive Player of the Week. Northern Arizona's running back room is decimated. Number 3 running back Dracene Hall leads the team with 11 carries for 71 yards. The receiving room, Hendricks Johnson, 4 receptions, 89 yards, and a touchdown. So look, okay week for Northern Arizona. Early on, NAU looked like a solid to strong defensive team. In how Northern Arizona's progressed in the last few weeks, including this week against Cal Poly, surrendering 465 yards, including getting just decimated against Idaho, 27-10. And last week at Portland State, Northern Arizona, not a particularly effective defensive outing, surrendering 479 yards. I think we can say officially that the early season, quote unquote, magic of Northern Arizona defensively, that's a mirage. This team is just not particularly good. To me, they certainly are no longer a mid-tier Big Sky team. They're better than the floor of the conference, but hey, maybe they're just better than Idaho State because Cal Poly is our number 11 team, and NAU just barely squeaked out this win, 31-29. It was a fun game to watch. It's competitive from wire to wire. Talked about the Bo Baldwin issue on the Cal Poly end, surrendering the 2 points. But hey, NAU took care of business they needed to. They come away with a win. NAU, for their rest of their schedule, I mean, look, this week, NAU is going to host UC Davis. Now, UC Davis is higher in the rankings, obviously, than NAU. But there's certainly chinks in the UC Davis armor. But I would not expect this is going to be a win for NAU. But bright side for NAU, they play 2 teams that suck throughout the rest of the season. They've got Idaho State on October 22nd and then Northern Colorado on November 12th. So there might be another 2 wins on the table for Northern Arizona, which would get them up to 4 4 wins on the season. Now you got to say in year 3 or 4 of Chris Ball. I think 2019 was the first Chris Ball year. This is not, I would not say this is an upward trajectory for NAU heading into this season, especially following going 500 last year. There's no way NAU finishes 500 this year. So I'm done talking about Northern Arizona. Coming in at number 8, Portland State, who had the top 5 Portland State, always on this show, they're top 5 Portland State. Portland State had the least interesting week of any Big Sky team, other than the intrigue about who in God's name is Lincoln University, because that's who Northern Arizona played. It's a school out of California. They're not NAIA, which that had been told to us on this show, but Martin Heemstra, crack researcher for Tubbs the Club, has said they're not. Lincoln is not exactly affiliated with any division that we are aware of. So, look, obviously Portland State beat the hell out of Lincoln 48-6. Look, on the ESPN page that I pull up for some of this, I can't even click on Lincoln, the school. They're 0-5. I can tell you that much. But we're 6 weeks in, and there's not a whole lot to talk about Portland State. I am not going to dignify Portland State scheduling Lincoln with a run through of their stats against Lincoln, because again, we're in week 6 of the season, and we get a God knows who Portland State's playing. So yeah, we're not doing a statistical breakdown. Portland State the last interesting game the Vikings had. So hey, at week 5, at least if I'm going to talk about them, might as well say something kind of interesting. In week 5, Portland State led 28-7 over NAU at the half. Tried very hard to faceplant this game. The Vikings tried very hard to faceplant this game away at the end, surrendering 20 fourth quarter points to NAU. But anyway, Portland State holds on for a 35-27 win last week. Stat breakdown from last week is quarterback Dante Sacheret, 22-28 for 274 yards and 3 touchdowns. So look, solid outing. We've said for a while Dante Sacheret is a solid quarterback, not best in Big Sky, but certainly a guy who Viking fans should have confidence in. Or if you're going against Portland State, you should know this is a guy who can beat you both through the air and on the ground. Against NAU, Sacheret runs 12 times for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. So pretty damn good outing. Although asterisk, NAU defensively is not what we thought they were. Covered that 4 seconds ago. So Portland State this week, the Vikings, who will have an imminently more interesting week than this week, because it's not possible to have a less interesting week. They're going to host Weber State. Now, last year, Portland State had a surprise win over Weber State in Weber State's down season, but this year's Wildcats look a bit different than last year's Wildcats. There's maybe at max 2 wins left on Portland State's schedule by my eye right now. On November 5th, Portland State is going to host Northern Colorado, and to close the season, Portland State's going to travel to San Luis Obispo to play Cal Poly. Otherwise, no wins in my mind on this schedule. They've got Weber State this week, the week 22nd. They're at Idaho. After Idaho, they're at Eastern, and in between those 2 winnable games, it's versus Sacramento State. So this is a Portland State team with 2 wins, one of which is Division I, that NAU wins. So I think there's a ceiling of 3 D1 wins for Portland State. They're pretty close to fork-sticking territory. The only asterisk is Sacheret actually does look all right. Now, Portland State cannot run the ball other than Sacheret. But there's been moments where Portland State can look kind of frisky defensively. VJ Mal is a guy on the defensive line to pay attention to. You've heard me 1,000 times reference Anthony Adams, one of the best cornerbacks in the league. But look, there is talent both secondary and front 7 for Portland State defensively. Not enough talent to win more than three D1 games, but enough talent to explain why they could be a threat to beat a team. They probably should not. We're done talking about Portland State. We have a tie at number 6. There is no 7. We have a 2-way tie at 6. UC Davis and Eastern Washington. UC Davis had a bye this week, so not a huge amount to talk about with Davis. Eastern Washington did not have a bye week, although Eastern probably wishes that's what happened. Eastern Washington traveled to Ogden to face Weber State Wildcats for Weber State's homecoming. This was a fun as hell game for half the game. At halftime, Eastern's down 21-14. This was a back and forth game. Weber State was scoring quickly because Eastern cannot defend, especially on the ground. But I mean, honestly, we're starting to look at the point that Eastern just can't defend in any capacity whatsoever. But the Eagles were able to drive against a very strong Weber State defense multiple times. However, second half's a different story. Maybe I should throw an asterisk. It's a 10-point game at the end of third quarter. Eastern's down 21-31. And then Weber State just slammed the door with 2 touchdowns in the fourth, shut out Eastern. We'll get to that with Weber State part, but from the Eastern Washington angle, Gunnar Talkington, 21-31, 198 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. So, I mean, solid outing relative to playing a great team. Leading Eastern on the ground is Tuna Altahir. Guarantee I butchered the dude's name. 19 carries, 81 yards, 1 touchdown. Eastern still doesn't seem to have that clear bell cow running back. However, Altahir led the team with 19 carries, so maybe he's become the guy. Prior to this, I don't remember talking about a guy named Altahir, so I'm just going to assume this is a recent development. Receiving, look, Weber's a tough team. That they're, DBU is the moniker that Weber State gets, and J-Hill teams certainly know how to defend. All league wide receiving talents, Freddie Roberson, Efton Chisholm III, did not have great games. The two combined for 6 receptions for 50 yards. Freddie Roberson did have a real nice touchdown, but for relative to 2 all Big Sky level dudes, that's not a ton of yards. However, of course, Eastern only threw for 198 yards. So what in God's name else could he do? So the thing Eastern is going to be pissed about is surrendering 460 yards to the Wildcats. Again, defensively, Eastern just doesn't really stop anyone. Wildcats average 10.8 yards per pass and 5.1 yards per rush. So honestly, with numbers like that, it's astonishing that this game felt competitive for 3 quarters, but it was. So shifting to kind of the more broad view, talking Eastern first. Eastern's 1-4. Maybe the best 1-4 team I will ever see because of scheduling. And this Eastern's probably going to turn into the best 1-5 team I've ever seen, because Eastern's going to host Sacramento State this week. And just with the way that Sacramento State can move the ball and the way Eastern can't stop teams from moving the ball, there's no way that the Eagles are going to pull that one out. So there are a couple winnable games, at least 3 winnable games second half of Eastern season, at Cal Poly on 10-22, hosting Portland State 10-29, closing the year out, hosting Northern Colorado 11-19. So that's 3 theoretical wins. That could push the Eastern up to 4 wins. Question mark on playing Idaho. It's hard to tell yet exactly how to rate Eastern, because Eastern's looked good. Look, they hung tight with Montana State the entire game. Eastern certainly could have beat Montana State in that 38-35 loss. Hung tight with Weber State for quite a while. Both those teams are good, so it's hard to gauge exactly where Eastern is based off their record. But we're gonna move on from Eastern for now. UC Davis is similar to Eastern in that Davis has a single win on the season. It's over San Diego. But Davis has looked certainly respectable in a couple outings. We talked in their week 2. UC Davis lost by 2 points to South Dakota State. UC Davis also hung tight with Weber State in their 4th game of the season, lost 17-12. Got killed at Montana State the last time that we saw Davis play, because this is Davis bye week, 41-21 last week at Montana State. So Davis this week has Northern Arizona. This is where Davis is going to start to pick up their wins. Davis sits at 1-4, but their next 3 games are hosting NAU, traveling to Northern Colorado, hosting Cal Poly, then hosting Idaho State. So you have to expect this is where Davis picks up the momentum. This is where Davis starts to reputationally look a little bit more solid. But if Davis is going to have any prayer to playoff resume, they're essentially going to have to run the table to get to 7-4, which will include getting wins on the road at Idaho and at Sacramento State in their final 2 weeks, if this is team's playoff team. I don't think Davis is a playoff team, but they certainly do not have a fork stuck in them. Expect reputationally Davis to look to at least sound like they are a better team, because look, a run of Northern Arizona, Northern Colorado, Cal Poly, and Idaho State is maybe the easiest month of scheduling any team in the Big Sky has, other than University of Montana's first 5 weeks. So yeah, we're going to learn the next 4 weeks is, look, if Davis loses any of those games, they suck. But otherwise, I think we're just going to learn that Davis is certainly a mid-tier Big Sky team when the Aggies come away with 4 consecutive wins. So look, I guess we're not going to know for sure if Davis is going to really make any sort of push until the Idaho game on November 12th. Moving on from the number 6 position to number 5, another team on bye, University of Idaho. Now, weirdly, the split between beat reporters and podcast contributors on Idaho, essentially the exact same. Only one person did not vote Idaho number 5. So reputationally, Idaho is clearly number 5 team in this league. Vandals didn't play this week. Last time the Vandals saw the field was last week, week 5, against Northern Colorado. Kind of mixed reviews. Like, the Vandals win 55-35. That's a blowout. That's an ass kicking. Tubbs the Club did an entire episode on it. So if you're still interested, you should listen. But little chinks in the armor for Idaho came in that Northern Colorado game, is really allowing Northern Colorado to hang around as long as the Vandals did. That the Vandals defensively have looked pretty dang strong this year. But you got to say, against Northern Colorado, look, the team had a handful of personal fouls defensively that were just backbreaking that kept Northern Colorado in this game. And that was not ref issues. That was Idaho making dumb mistakes. Idaho also had offensive penalties, wiped a touchdown off the board. Honestly, 14 points were added there's 14 points taken away from Idaho in the scoring margin against Northern Colorado last week in the first quarter, where there was a defensive personal foul that extended a Northern Colorado drive that had been snuffed out on 3rd down. Well, that turned into a touchdown immediately afterwards. And Idaho had a long pass that went to the 2-yard line, wiped away from a hands to face from a lineman. That's part of why that game stayed competitive as long as it did. But look, the box score is going to tell you this was an ass kicking. 55-35. The Vandals punt 1 total time, accrue 560 yards, 298 through the air, 262 on the ground. So look, 6.7 yards per rush, 11 yards per pass. Giovanni McCoy goes 22 of 27, plus a couple of those incompletions were throwaways on purpose. So last time Idaho saw the field, I guess a split you'd say is offensively, the Vandals look like they're getting a little bit better every week. You wouldn't quite say that defensively. There's been a couple chinks against some of the less impressive teams Idaho's played, in particular Drake, and in week 3 for Idaho, and Northern Colorado in week 5. But minus those 2 games where there's some chinks early, which Idaho rectified both offensively and defensively. Vandals look like they're a tough defensive team overall. This week, the Vandals face not their first test, but man, the marquee game of the week is clearly going to be Idaho traveling to Missoula for University of Montana. Idaho will be the very first real team, or at least solid team, that Montana's played all year. Idaho's a team that at number 5 in the conference, look, it's not shocking for 5 Big Sky teams to make the playoffs. So the fifth Big Sky team usually doesn't get a bye. Well, that's what most people don't understand Idaho as right now. The Vandals are now in a run schedule-wise where they're going to play. They've exited their easy run after a rough first 2 weeks of Power 5 games. Idaho has had their easy run of schedule of hosting Drake Pioneer Conference, traveling to NAU, then hosting Northern Colorado. The Vandals took care of business in all 3 of those games. Schedule gets a little bit tougher. Vandals are entering the meat of their season with Montana this week, Portland State next week. That's a game Idaho fans at this point should expect they take care of business. After Portland State, Idaho travels to Sac State, then hosts Eastern and hosts Davis. So this next month of Vandal football is against only, minus Portland State, that's the asterisk, it's against very good, like top 5 in the nation teams in Montana and Sacramento State on the road, and then pretty solid Big Sky teams that the record of Eastern and UC Davis, as just covered, does not seem to reflect what those teams are, because neither of those teams are bad teams, even though there's only 2 total wins between them. But if Idaho is truly the number 5 team in this conference, as our voters seem to believe, and I believe I voted Idaho number 5. I spent no time wondering if I'd put the Vandals at 5. If that's who these Vandals are, then they're gonna be playing some teams where they're gonna get a shot to prove it. couple names just to pay attention to for Idaho. Receiving room, Jermaine Jackson leads the way. In 5 games, he's got 20 receptions for 447 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also returned a kick for a touchdown. This is a team that on the ground, it's running back by committee. There's 3 running backs with 20 or more attempts. Anthony Woods, true freshman, 62 rushes for 359 yards. That's 5.7 yards per carry. COVID Jr., meaning he's been here a few years. Roschon Johnson, 66 rushes for 238 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's a short yardage back, but gets more than just short yardage carries since he leads the team in rushes. And then a guy who missed the first few games of the season and has been a kind of a revelation as a change of pace back, Elijah Cummings. He's a solid pass catcher, but he's elusive on the ground as well. 23 rushes, 134 yards, averaging 5.2 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. So look, the Vandals look to run first. Defensively, they're pretty dang good, but cannot sleep on the fact that Giovanni McCoy on this season, 72.8% completion percentage. That counts 2 Power 5 games. If you look at Giovanni McCoy against FCS teams, he's damn near 80% completion percentage, and half those incomplete passes are purposeful throwaways. So a lot going well for Idaho. Number 5, reasonable spot. That marquee game of next week is going to tell us a lot about both the Grizz and University of Idaho. Coming in at number 4, Montana State. Montana State obviously decimated Idaho State, as covered earlier, 37-6. Kind of the revelation for Montana State is with Tommy Mellott out, preseason All Big Sky quarterback Tommy Mellott, touchdown Tommy, a big name in the state of Montana because dude went to high school in Montana. Yeah, Tommy Mellott might not be the best Tommy Mellott style player on this team. Sean Chambers, man, how has that quarterback been a revelation? Chambers against Idaho State, 16-22 passing for 150 yards. But on the ground, Chambers 8 rushes for 33 yards and 3 touchdowns. So the Bobcats got a little bit of a reprieve from injury. Lane Sumner, who's very good early in the season, returned. He's running back, rushes 15 times for 100 yards. Elisha Elliott also 16 rushes for 68 yards. But look, we just have to go over some of the season stats for Sean Chambers. Chambers has played in 6 games, but 2 of those were as strictly a running back. At least 2 were as strictly a running back. Tommy Mellott has played in 4. Passing wise, those 2 dudes have virtually identical stats. Mellott on the season before going down with injury was 40-67, 4 touchdowns, 3 picks. All 3 picks came against Oregon State, so you'll forgive him. 590 yards through the air total. Sean Chambers, 38-64. So essentially the same. They're both at 59% completion percentage. Both have 3 picks, though Chambers' 3 picks did not come against Oregon State. Chambers has thrown for 5 touchdowns. But gotta talk about Chambers on the ground, because this is both as a running back and as a quarterback. The guy can just run. In 6 games, 77 attempts for 615 yards, or a net of 581 because 34 yards were lost. 7.5 yards per carry, 15 rushing touchdowns for Sean Chambers, guys. Real question about who's the guy who should lead the way for Montana State when Tommy Mellott comes back. Not as a put down to Mellott. Mellott is a solid guy who a ton of Big Sky teams would kill to have that dude on their team. But Sean Chambers looks like he might be a step ahead. And he's a guy who you can also put he can play him as a running back, and he's been effective, and he's equally effective as a passer to Tommy Mellott. On the ground, Tommy Mellott this year, 42 attempts for 215 net yards. That's 5.1 yards per rush, 1 touchdown. Different game situation, because when Tommy Mellott was starting quarterback, there was some time where Sean Chambers was the starting running back. So that's part of why you got the 15 rushing touchdowns for Sean Chambers. But yeah, man, Chambers has been just wild as a revelation, both as a running back and as a quarterback. Real question about what Montana State is gonna do if Mellott's back. Upcoming schedule we have for Montana State is, we're getting to the point now. Look, I'm talking about the number 4 team in the Big Sky. The best teams in the Big Sky have not yet really played each other. Minus Weber State has played Eastern and UC Davis. So of the top Big Sky teams, Weber is the only team that's really had much of a test so far schedule-wise. That's going to change in not too long. Now, it doesn't change that much for Montana State. Montana State, they're right now the Bobcats, they're sitting at 5-1. One loss coming out of Oregon State. Next few weeks, Montana State gets Northern Colorado next week. The first real FCS test for Montana State is on October 22nd, hosting Weber State. That's probably game of the week on the week of October 22nd. After Weber State, there's a couple more just throwaway wins from Montana State at NAU, at Cal Poly, and closing at Montana. So of the top teams, Montana State probably has the easiest remaining schedule. They do play two very good teams in Weber State and Montana, but the Bobcats also get three pretty shitty teams out of their final 5 games. So it's inconceivable right now that Montana State is not only that Montana State could miss the playoffs, but even more inconceivable, you got to pencil Montana State in as probably having a bye, because worst case scenario, Bobcats are going to have 2 FCS losses, 3 losses on the season. That's worst case scenario. So look, I suppose if Montana State loses both those games, the committee might look at that resume and say, look, there's not enough wins for a bye, but this is easily a playoff team. And relative to the injury bug Montana State has had to weather, that offensive line that Montana State has built started with Jeff Choate, has been continued by Brett Vegan. If you can have that many dudes go down as running backs and still it just doesn't matter, Montana State is a team that they're going to rush. Everyone knows Montana State's going to rush more than they pass, and it just doesn't matter. Teams can't stop it. So that's pretty impressive talent on the offensive line. Defensively, these guys, it's hard to tell how for real Montana State is defensively because of the teams they played. Look, Eastern hung 35 on Montana State, but Eastern's a good scoring team. Eastern looked pretty dang good for moments against Weber State, for long stretches against Weber State. UC Davis hung 24, but 24 is not a ton of points exactly. Most teams, if they surrender 24 points, are probably expecting to come away with a win. Other than that, Montana State has not really been tested much. They have 2 total tests left at the end of the season. That's part of why the Bobcats come in at number 4. But if we were doing the hope/optimism to misery index this week, Montana State would score just fine. Coming in at number 3, Weber State. And this is the only time I'm going to talk about my personal poll. I've had Weber State at number 1 since Weber State beat Utah State 35-7, not surrendering a single offensive touchdown. Done talking about my personal poll. Weber State beat Eastern Washington 45-21. Game was competitive. But look, this is just another version of part of why Weber State, to me, should be higher than number 3. Number 3 is fine. Nationally, Weber State's a top 10 team, and they should be. But the Wildcats, they can score this year, guys. 45 points against Eastern. Yeah, Eastern sucks defensively, but this is not the only time the Wildcats have put up points. Look, 35 against Utah State. 44. Look, Utah Tech sucks, but Wildcats hung 44 on Utah Tech. You play who you play. This season, there's been one game that Weber State has scored fewer than 30 points. That was at UC Davis, and it was turnovers to explain why the Wildcats couldn't score. Offensive coordinator Mikey Mental, first year, clearly has some room, is being given some leeway to operate, and this is not your stereotypical Weber State team. If they shut you down, then they can't score. No, but this team certainly can shut you down. Eastern is the first team, first Division I team, not counting their Weber's Week 1 game against Division II Western Oregon. Eastern is the first team Weber's played that scored 3 times against the Wildcats. And this season, so as talked about in the Weber State broadcast, the Wildcats have not allowed a single touchdown this year in the 4th quarter. So you factor in what the hell they're doing defensively in Ogden. With the fact that Weber State can score, this is a team that for sure is you should pencil this team in as having a bye in the playoffs. But I said a second ago that we're going to get to a point where the good teams are going to have to play each other. That's in Weber State's cards. I'm going to talk about that real quick, but just a couple stats from Weber State against Eastern. Bronson Barron goes 16-22 for 237 yards, throws a touchdown. On the ground, Damon Bankston rushes 14 times for 94 yards and a touchdown. Dante McMillan chips in 93 rushes on 9 attempts and 2 touchdowns. Josh Davis is a name that most Big Sky fans are familiar with, and Josh Davis is still a good running back, but due to injuries, it's not shocking that a couple guys are being a little bit more productive per rush than Davis. Davis goes 8 rushes for 32 yards. In the receiving room, Ty McPherson is always going to lead Weber State in receiving yards because Ty McPherson is one of the best receivers in this conference. 6 receptions for 128 yards and a touchdown against Eastern. We also had Justin Malone chipping in 3 catches, 41 yards, no touchdowns. But look, as always, Weber State recovers a fumble. Weber State, they do have a little bit of turnover issues. Bronson Barron fumbles twice. Also had Jack Burgess fumble once. Burgess is a running back for Weber State. So look, turnover bug is a thing for Weber State to watch when you're looking at the upcoming schedule. But this is also a team that's going to score on special teams. We had Abraham Williams take a kick return 100 yards for a touchdown. We also had Weber State a couple times on 4th down, fake punt, rushes 2 yards for a conversion. Weber State is probably the best special teams team in the league. They're one of the best defensive teams in the league. And look, they're not the best offensive team in the league, but Weber State is a top 4 offensive team in the Big Sky in terms of production right now. So really hard to say enough positive about Weber State in my mind. Look, these guys just look for real. I spent no time wondering who I was going to put number 1 this week. Weber State in the future, though, this is a team they've already been tested at Utah State. Weber State also has already beaten UC Davis and Eastern, so I don't think there's any question the Wildcats are for real. But schedule gets tough pretty damn quick. This week, Weber State travels to Portland State. I know there's a little bit of intrigue on the Weber State side because Portland State beat Weber last year. There's no intrigue in my mind. If the only way Portland State wins this is if Bronson Barron throws a few picks and we have a few fumbles like this game. After Portland State this coming week, man, Weber State has probably the toughest run any team has in the Big Sky. Traveling to Montana State October 22nd, hosting Montana October 29th, hosting Sacramento State November 5th. That's back to back to back best teams in the conference who aren't Weber. So, this conference season's about to get real interesting in these next few weeks, especially if you're a Weber State Wildcat. The Wildcats close out the season with pencil-in wins against Idaho State and Northern Arizona. But thing for next week, for the upcoming weeks, the best teams in this league haven't really played each other. That just can't last the entire season. I know the schedule's imbalanced, and that does lead some teams to not play other teams. But like, not everyone can avoid everyone, and that's what's happened so far in terms of the blue bloods of this conference. That's going away in October, late November. So look, we're done talking about Weber State. The number 2 team in our poll. This may be a surprise. University of Montana. Look, the Grizz are on bye this week. They play Idaho in the upcoming week. Week before, Grizz, least inspiring performance of the season for Montana. Last time we saw them on the field when Montana beat Idaho State 28-20. It's a game the Grizz led 28-6 at one point and more or less mailed it in. Surrendered garbage time touchdowns. That's why the score is as close as it was. I'm going to spend 10 seconds going over the stats from that game. Not a ton, because look, Idaho State's terrible. I stuck a fork in them already. But look, the Grizz scored 21 points in the second quarter against Idaho State, and then 7 in the third. Again, it's 21-3 at halftime. 21-6 at halftime, 28-6 at the end of the third quarter. This was not a close game, but still, least impressive outing from the Grizz the entire season. Bobby Houck probably pretty pissed. Montana surrendering 381 yards to Idaho State 2 weeks ago, but the Grizz accrued 454 yards. Not really a game that was close. Just ignore the end score of 28-20. That was not a close game. Luke Johnson, quarterback, goes 18-30 for 168 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Chris Brown saw relief duty, 1 of 2 for 12 yards. And that's what I mean. Look, if Montana was concerned about that game, Chris Brown probably doesn't play. Marcus Knight had his on the ground. Marcus Knight, maybe he's back now. The recovery from Marcus Knight from blowing his ACL after the 2019 season has been a long road. Montana is pretty much running back by committee, but Knight maybe asserts himself against Idaho State. 14 rushes for 109 yards and a touchdown. Knight set the Montana record for rushing touchdowns in a season in 2019. So if he's returning back into the form as we're rounding into the meat of the season for Montana, that's obviously huge news for the Grizz. Leading receiver, almost as always, Mitch Roberts, 4 receptions for 41 yards. But there's a lot of talent in that University of Montana receiving room. Just got to hit a couple things other than individual offensive stats for the Grizz, because look, the Grizz are one of the best defensive teams in the league. They've played an easy schedule, sure, but they're giving up 11.4 points per game. They've outscored teams 201-57. That's part of why, again, if you're going to play an easy schedule like the Grizz have, what you do is beat the shit out of everyone. Essentially, that's what Montana's done. Like even the Idaho State game that was close for 3 quarters, the Grizz, even uninspiring, did beat the shit out of Idaho State. So look, that's just what this team is. Defensively, they're unbelievably strong. Giving up right now, the Grizz are giving up 2.2 yards per rush attempt, which is freakishly good. And also, look, through the air, Grizz are giving up 166 yards per game through the air. So I guess that's part of why, even though the Grizz have had a pretty easy schedule, like the Grizz are only number 2 because Sacramento State has been tested more than Montana against good teams. Montana locks teams down on the ground and through the air. And this Grizz team can score better than last year's team. So I've got nothing to say other than the test Montana has coming this week, hosting Idaho, where look, I'm a Vandal. On paper, the Grizz are obviously going to be favored in this game because the Grizz should be favored as a top 5, maybe number 1 team in the FCS after North Dakota State's had a couple uninspiring games. Like North Dakota State beat Indiana State by 7 this week. Well, the Grizz, who I just went over how the Grizz have a pretty easy opening schedule so far. Well, the Grizz traveled to Terre Haute, Indiana, and beat Indiana State 49-14. Well, if Montana can do that against Indiana State and North Dakota State can't do that, that's letting you know about the talent University of Montana trots out both sides of the ball. They're probably stronger defensively than they are offensively, but the Grizz, they're kind of like Weber State. The Grizz absolutely can score. The Grizz can absolutely win games because of their offensive effort. But then defensively, if there's a better team defensively than Montana, it's Weber State. That's it in my mind. So look, the Idaho game is interesting, but the Grizz are done not avoiding. That's not the correct way to say it. The Grizz are now in the meat of their schedule as well. In the next month, Montana gets to host Idaho, then travel to Sacramento State on October 22nd, and then travel to Weber State on October 29th. Little reprieve with Cal Poly after that, but then the Grizz close the year hosting Eastern, then traveling to Montana State. So in that second half of the season, for the first half season, Grizz took care of business. Second half of the season is where the Grizz is going to be tested virtually every week, with really just one quote unquote bye week against Cal Poly. Otherwise, look, that's 3 top 10 teams on the schedule with Sacramento State, Weber State, Montana State. Idaho's receiving votes in the top 25. So that's 4 of their last 6 games are against teams that are either in the top 10 or receiving votes. So that's the Grizz we're going to find out exactly how real these Grizz are, but with 5 wins already, it's going to be virtually impossible for the Grizz to not be in the playoffs. And if the Grizz pick off a couple of those top 10 teams, then you're looking at a team that's probably got a bye in the playoffs. So number 1, the first time we've had a new number 1, Sacramento State, Hornets up. Hornets, they're the team that stuck the fork in Northern Colorado, beating the Bears 55-7. Game was not close for even 4 seconds. Just look at team stats. Sacramento State, 622 yards accrued total, 290 passing, 332 on the ground. Complete decimation. Now, I bring that up because offensively, Sacramento State has more or less only decimated teams so far. The worst offensive output for Sacramento this year was at Northern Iowa, winning 37-21. So 37 is the worst scoring output the Hornets have had this season. Otherwise, we'll just run through week 1, 56 against Utah Tech, just covered in Northern Iowa week 2 at FBS Colorado State. Sure, Colorado State's a dumpster fire, but Big Sky team shouldn't beat a Mountain West team at all. And certainly a Big Sky team should not beat a Mountain West team 41-10. Of course, at the Mountain West team's home, that's Colorado State, who Sacramento State beat shit out of 41-10. After that, hanging 49 points on Cal Poly, then 55 on Northern Colorado. Yeah, Cal Poly and Northern Colorado suck, but every team the Hornets have played against, the Hornets just move the ball because they can, and they can do it on the ground. They can do it through the air. This game, look, Jake Dunaway, he's the traditional pocket passer. He goes 20-28, 258 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns. Asher O'Hara, he's their kind of change-up back, short yardage back, quarterback, and he also runs a ton. He goes 3-6 for 20 yards. On the ground, Cameron Scadaboo might be the best. Look, he seriously might be the best running back in this league. He certainly looks like he's probably the most physical running back in this league, as long as Isaiah Fonse is going to be on the shelf. Scadaboo rushes 18 times for 124 yards and a touchdown. Also for the Hornets on the ground, because like they had multiple guys put in impressive efforts. Asher O'Hara, 11 rushes for 57 yards and a touchdown. Receiving, probably the best tight end in the league is on Sacramento State, Marceau Martin. He had 6 catches for 103 yards and a touchdown. Pierre Williams, it looks like he's just not going to get the kind of the number of receptions this season that the dude got last year as an all Big Sky level performer. He's 2 catches for 23 yards. But keep in mind, as Sac State's scoring a ton, they still have talent in the receiving room that doesn't seem to be focal point of the offense that previously was first team all Big Sky. Got to run through a couple Sacramento State stats just on the season. Offensively, Cameron Scadaboo, the reason I say he's got to be, if Cameron Scadaboo is not the best running back in the Big Sky this season, he's at worst the second or third. Dude's got 67 attempts for 539 total yards. That's 8 yards per attempt on 67 attempts. That's right around also what Scadaboo averaged last season. That's just what the dude does. He's also a solid pass catcher. On the team, on the season receiving, Scadaboo, 13 receptions for 160 yards. That's 12 yards per reception, as well as 2 touchdowns. Referenced Marceau Martin earlier in the year. Sac State spreads the ball around pretty well. That Martin's their top receiver as far as number of receptions and total yards. 25 receptions for 342 yards and 4 touchdowns. But there are 5 Hornets with 13 or more catches on the season, including Marcus Fulcher, who Fulcher also is a running back, similar to Scadaboo. He gets yardage both on the ground through the air. 5 games, 31 rushes for 191 yards or 186 yards, 6 yards per rush and 3 touchdowns. Receiving, Fulcher, 23 receptions, 137 yards and a touchdown. So look, Hornets offensively, they are just, and honestly, they feel like a different kind compared to the rest of the Big Sky right now. Weber State has been looking pretty damn good too. But defensively, look, this is not a team that is terrible on the defensive side of the ball. Sacramento State, look, they at times look like the Hornets are susceptible through the air, but on the season, Sacramento State's given up 18.4 points per game while scoring 47.6 points per game. That's an ass kicking. If ass kickings exist, that's it. On the ground, Sacramento State gives up 3.2 yards per rush. That counts, the FBS games too, which one was a win. Through the air, Sacramento State a little more susceptible, but still, Sacramento State's given up 6.8 yards per attempt. 7 touchdowns have been given up through the air. On the ground, 5 touchdowns. So Sacramento State's given up 12 touchdowns on the season. Defensively, the dudes look solid, but overall, offensively is where Sacramento State really separates itself. They're also about to run into the Hornets are about to run into the meat of their schedule as well. They sit at 5-0. Now the Hornets at least have kind of been challenged, because I know Colorado State sucks. They wouldn't win the Big Sky, but Colorado State, I mean, they're obviously better than Idaho State. Otherwise, Northern Iowa, that was a 37-21 win in week 2 for Sacramento State. Hornets right now are sitting at 5-0. Northern Iowa is a little bit less impressive a win now than it had been earlier in the season. But the meat of Sacramento State's schedule this week, Hornets host Eastern. That's followed up by a trip to Montana, followed up by a trip to Marceau to play the Vandals. That's followed by hosting Weber State. So this next month for Sacramento State, they've looked pretty damn good. Hornets are going to be tested as well. That's maybe the theme. The top five in this conference. That's not Portland State, is going to be tested. But right now we've got the Hornets at number 1. I didn't vote them number 1, but look, it's pretty damn split amongst the top 3 teams of Sacramento State, Montana, Weber State. All those teams deserve number 1 votes. Montana State, honestly, they should probably be in that discussion as well. The top of this conference just looks pretty damn good, guys. I don't know any other way to say it. This episode, as always, brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. If you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976 and are ready to take you on vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River, no return, the Salmon River Canyons and Selway, and check out special trips like the one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring it close, let HRE handle the rest. Hughes River Expedition, right now. Give them a call, 800-262-1882, or check them out at hughesriver.com. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. If you give them a call, schedule your own trip. All right, guys, thanks for joining this week. We'll be back to regular showings. Got to hit the comment thread real quick. As a one-man show, I can't hit that quite as regularly. But look, Patrick Ferguson, you actually pronounced Tuna's name right. Okay, referenced that earlier in the episode, but thank you. We have Mobin saying Idaho still at number 5. Travesty. Mobin, I don't know. They were nearly unanimous number 5. And when people, I don't know whose people's handles are. I can't tell how easily those are jokes. Captain 58 said Northern Colorado would make Colorado look like Alabama. Correct. And Max McCaffrey would essentially make any defensive coordinator look like a future Hall of Famer with what Max McCaffrey calls. We also have Pinto says, did they win a hypothetical Colorado versus Northern Colorado if they had played this year? He's talking about Colorado, Northern Colorado and Colorado. We're done running through the comment section, but hey, thanks for joining us, guys. Best way, if you like what we're doing here, please share the episode. Hammer that subscribe button on YouTube. Once we get to 1,000 subscribers, YouTube starts to pay Tubs of the Club. If you like what you saw here, make sure to tune in to Tubs of the Club later this week, or check out other Big Sky Podcast Network shows. It's guys like Weber State Weekly, Grizz Fan Podcast, R&R Catcast, Eagles Power Hour, NAU, Big Sky Sports. Look, we're covering as many teams as we possibly can. This is probably the best time it's ever been for FCS and Big Sky content. There's still other places to look. Hey, Skyline Sports, they're going to join Tubs of the Club this week. Colton Nuanez, Skyline Sports, the only daily show that you can listen to relating to Big Sky Sports. So give Skyline Sports a follow. Check them out on YouTube or podcast. But anyway, guys, thanks for joining. We'll be back next week. It is time for me to stumble through closing this show out. Thanks for coming, and I am going to start just clicking on stuff to call it a day. See you next week. Jesus Christ. Motherfucker.